Everybody, and welcome to the Water Quality Protection Land Speaker Series. We're really happy to have y'all here today. So a little brief overview, the Water Quality Protection Lands, or WQPL for short, was created in 1998 to protect Barton Springs, which is one of the largest springs in Texas, and a natural outlet of the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer, which stretches over central Texas. The WQPL safeguards groundwater that emerges at Barton Springs through the conservation and restoration of large, interconnected natural areas that stretch from northern Hays County to North Austin. By restoring grassland savanna ecosystems and healthy riparian corridors, the WQPL not only supplies high-quality water to recharge the Barton Springs segment of the Edwards Aquifer, but it also provides habitat for wildlife, protects cultural resources, and supports research to better understand the natural world protected by these lands. So quick intro for me, I am Jaya Torres. I am one of the information specialists with Austin Water's Wildland Conservation Division. Today, we're really happy to have Robin Gary, Director of Watershed Protection and Conservation Science for the Watershed Association. Today, she's going to explain how Jacob's Well is connected to San Marcos and Barton Springs, and we'll talk about how well owners and groundwater users across the whole country can help protect them. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session, so please feel free to put any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and I will get to those after the presentation. And there's also going to be a recording of the webinar posted on our YouTube channel, as well as our Wildland Facebook page. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will hand it over to Robin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. It is an honor to be one of the first speakers in the series that the Water Quality Protection Lands have started. This is something very close to my heart. I love groundwater, and I love groundwater science, and I love the springs of the Hill Country. So it's an honor to talk about watersheds, wells, and conservation with all of you today. I'm Robin Gary, and I work with the Watershed Association. We are a nonprofit, formerly known as the Wimberley Valley Watershed Association. We were started back by our founder, David Baker, back in 1996 as a way to be a land trust to kind of piece together all the parcels that create or that had access to Jacob's Well, and that's really where we got our start. Jacob's Well was being loved to death. Everyone and their neighbors friends would come and trespass to get on into see Jacob's Well. And David realized that the best way to preserve Jacob's Well is to make it a publicly accessible natural area. So back in 2010, the Hays County passed a bond and actually it was 2008. But in 2010, the bond money funded what has grown to 81 acres of the Jacob's Well natural area. And this protects Jacob's Well spring, as well as a good portion of the area immediately upstream or up dip from there. The Watershed Association was instrumental in piecing together the dozens of parcels, the tiny little puzzle pieces that all had access to Jacob's Well. And it is now a natural area where you can go any day of the week, 7 days a week. You can always go hiking, and you can hike out to go see Jacob's Well, which is a beautiful spring. It attracts over 100,000 visitors each year. And of those visitors, they're coming from far and wide. Over 30 countries every year is represented. So you get to hear all sorts of interesting languages down at the well and see the awe that it inspires from international visitors. Now, swimming is by reservation. The county has set up a reservation system that allows about 60 people per 2-hour block. And this has been going on since since about, I think it was 2013. And except for this summer, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this summer, the water levels, well, actually last year in July and August, the water levels were so low that the spring stopped flowing and became unsafe for swimming. So given the current drought and the lack of recharge, there's not enough flow to make a safe swimming area. So the county has suspended swimming reservations there. The cave itself that has created the spring has been mapped by cave divers to over 6,000 feet of passage. And using this map, geologists have determined that the majority of the cave passage is actually in the supply aquifer for our area. So the cave passage shown on the right is down in the Cow Creek limestone, which is a crucial layer of very fresh water in the Middle Trinity Aquifer. And that's what all of our community relies on for their water supply. The neighborhoods or even the private wells primarily use the Middle Trinity Aquifer. So the health of Jacob's Well is really the health of the water supply and the natural beauty that surrounds Wimberley area. Jacob's Well is the headwaters to Cypress Creek, which flows through downtown. It passes camps and bed and breakfasts, lots of houses and businesses, and it's really an attraction to come see the natural beauty of the hill country. And Wimberley is known for this. So it's devastating that our water flow from Jacob's Well has is diminished so much from drought and groundwater pumping that the iconic swimming holes of Jacob's Well and Blue Hole last year had to close. Blue Hole is a section of Cypress Creek that's particularly deep, and it still relies on the flow coming from Jacob's Well to keep a healthy flow volume moving through there, so that when you add swimmers, you're also allowing the water to be replenished by good quality groundwater. So when you think about how why these two swimming areas had to close, it's not because the quality of the water from the aquifer changed. In fact, it's still high quality water, but the amount of flow combined with the amount of swimmers caused a lot of bacterial problems. So you can think about it, if you had a swimming pool and you invited 60 people to come over, but you turned off the filter and you had those 60 people swimming for 2 hours, and then you invited another set of 60 people to come over and the filter's still off, you could see that would quickly add into kind of a water quality crisis there. So flow in Wimberley, flow from Jacob's Well Spring, is essential because it's providing that base flow to Cypress Creek. And as Jaya noted, we're going to connect Jacob's Well and Trinity Springs all the way down to Edwards Springs. So the base flow from Jacob's Well fills Cypress Creek, and then it flows into the Blanco River. And the Blanco River, groundwater scientists have looked at the way that the flow enters recharge features downstream of Wimberley and determined through dye tracing that the Blanco River water shows up at San Marcos Springs, showed on the right here. That's Cream of Wheat Springs under healthy flow. But it also travels as far away as Barton Springs. So you can tell that the Blanco River is an essential water source for Edwards Springs also. We'll take a little dive into geology here, and we'll look at this map. This was a map done by Molly O'Halloran, and she did it with watercolor, but with a GIS underlay. So it represents truly the best science that we have as far as the hydrogeology layers at play on the surface. The greens are Trinity Aquifer rocks, and the blues are Edwards Aquifer rocks. The light blue is the infamous and well-renowned recharge zone of the Edwards Aquifer. And a lot of the water quality protection lands target large tracts of land in this area because where the Edwards Aquifer rocks are at the surface, it is the easiest for water to pass down from the surface into the groundwater system. You can see a lot of creeks cross the recharge zone, starting from Barton Creek, and you've got Williamson Creek, Slaughter Creek, Bear Creek, Little Bear Creek, Onion Creek, and then the Blanco River. So all of those are considered recharge creeks because they're funneling water from upstream across the recharge zone and down into caves. You'll see a number of different cave symbols there, like Wildflower Cave and Whirlpool Cave. In fact, those are two very good beginner caves where lots of people get to explore what it's like to go down underground. The greens that are contributing the water to these recharge creeks, that's actually the Trinity Aquifer rocks. And the Trinity also has recharge zones. In fact, the areas of darker green are the Middle Trinity rocks where that scuba diver was diving, where you see that it also can form cave passages and rapidly transmit water from one place to another in the groundwater system. So where that Cow Creek limestone or the Middle Trinity section of the Trinity Aquifer is at the surface, we know that we can receive a lot of water very quickly into the Trinity Aquifer system. We have Jacob's Well that I showed pictures of. So we're kind of getting oriented here. We also have San Marcos Springs. We know that Cypress Creek flows to the Blanco River, and then the Blanco River recharges the Edwards Aquifer and flows to San Marcos Springs and Barton Springs. And just to make the point, I also want to highlight the Pleasant Valley Springs and the spring complex associated with the base flow of the Blanco River through that section. We're going to take a look at the water flow from the city of Blanco down to San Marcos to get an idea of what's happening from water and how it plays between surface and groundwater and the two different aquifers that feed these iconic springs. This is another cross-section done by Molly O'Halloran. This appeared in the Blanco River book by Wes Ferguson. And I think it's really interesting and useful to describe what's happening when water flows from a spring in Blanco. It fills the Blanco River. So there we are. Fills the Blanco River, but then you notice that the water has passed over this dark green area that I said is the Middle Trinity outcrop, or that's where the Middle Trinity Aquifer rocks are at the surface. And they allow water to get very quickly down into the groundwater system and recharge that groundwater system. So we see a section of the Blanco River as known as the dry Blanco, because during non-storm flow conditions, or when spring flow is low, that section of the Blanco goes dry because the water is underground and it's traveling underground through there. But it comes back up and it comes back up through the Pleasant Valley Springs and travels downstream and goes past Wimberley. The Blanco River is a wet river through Wimberley, where it receives the base flow, if it's available, from Jacob's Well and the Cypress Creek. And then again, it flows through over the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone and back down into the groundwater system below, through here. And then goes through the groundwater system to both San Marcos Springs and Barton Springs. So you can see there's a connection between what's happening in the Trinity Aquifer and the Trinity Springs that are feeding the base flow for a lot of the recharge that's happening to the Edwards Aquifer. So we have our Trinity Aquifer Springs and we have our Edwards Aquifer Springs, and we want to see what lies in between these two spring systems. And if you want to guess, I'll show you. There's a lot of wells and there's some caves. We have Trinity caves, just like the one shown here, that's Wimberley Bat Cave. And we have lots of wells that can go from Middle Trinity wells, Upper Trinity wells, to Edwards wells. And then we also have caves down in the Edwards Aquifer. I always feel like it's useful to have a picture of what these things actually look like and not just use icons to show the different types of wells. So the Trinity Aquifer Springs are much smaller than the Edwards Aquifer Springs because they don't have the catchment that the Edwards Springs have. There's a lot of them. They're like little pinpricks. You know, there's lots and lots of very small springs. When we're talking about Jacob's well flow, right now it's flowing less than 1 cubic foot per second. And that's compared to Barton Springs, that's flowing at about 30 cubic feet per second. And San Marcos Springs is flowing at about 85 cubic feet per second. So you can tell that those Edwards Springs benefit from the contributions that we're receiving from the Trinity Aquifer here. And those springs also add important base flow to the recharged creeks that go ultimately across either the Trinity Aquifer recharge areas or the Edwards Aquifer recharge areas. But when you add in what happens in between the springs, this is where it starts getting complex. And this is where it starts getting pretty critical when you tack on drought to normal groundwater use. What's being shown here, we have the Edwards Aquifer in blue and the Trinity Aquifer in green. We have our springs on the map, but we have a whole bunch of other dots too. And those are groundwater wells. And I've symbolized them by use type. So we have lots and lots of domestic wells. Those are the light blue, smaller dots. We have irrigation wells that are the green squares. Primarily, they're around the Austin area, and I'll show you why in just a little bit. There's industrial or commercial wells, not very many of those. But then there's a significant number of public water supply wells. So those are larger wells that supply whole cities or whole neighborhoods. When we look, well, one other point I want to make here is that when we're pulling water out of the groundwater system, it influences the spring flow. And with so many wells and such small Trinity Springs, it really does impact very quickly what's happening in those springs. And we see that in a measurable sort of way at Jacob's Well, because it is a well-known, publicly accessible place that has been monitored since 2005. Many thanks to David Baker and to the Wimberley Watershed Association and the partners in GBRA, the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, because they all understand that this is critical information for management decisions and for looking at the effects of pumping on groundwater systems, as well as drought. If I leave the wells and the springs and the creeks and rivers on, and then focus only on the water systems that rely on these, we can see that there is a huge group of people that can make a big difference and what's being withdrawn from the groundwater system. I've symbolized the water utilities here by their groundwater or by their water source. So yellow being only reliant on surface water. So the city of Austin is wholly supplied by surface water from the Highland Lakes. The Water Forward Plan does take into account a number of other water supply options for them. But as of right now, we're going to say that the grand majority of the water being supplied is from surface water. The blue water utilities are only reliant on groundwater. So when you look out in Western Hays County and out in Blanco County, where the groundwater recharges the Trinity Aquifer, you can see that all those people are reliant on groundwater, either through private wells or through their water systems. And then along the I-35 corridor, we have a number of communities that have diversified, but still rely a lot on Edwards groundwater, which also comes from the Trinity and benefits from the availability in that Trinity Aquifer. So when we talk about who can make a difference with what's going on in the drought and the way that we understand the groundwater flow, there's a lot of people that can make a big, significant difference by using less water and by finding alternative sources like rainwater harvesting. The ever-present drought. It has been said that Texas is in a perpetual state of drought, only interrupted periodically by drastic flooding. And that's a paraphrase. But you can see that Hays and Travis County have a significant portion in the extreme drought category. And what's a little bit more concerning is that where we know that the water comes from, that fills our creeks and rivers and lakes, that is also an exceptional to extreme drought. So it's a big, ever-present challenge that we all have to face. And spring has been weird this year. We've had enough rain for the vegetation to mask what is actually happening in our water supply reservoirs, be they surface water or groundwater systems. So it's a little out of sight, out of mind right now with most people that I talk to. Hopefully not after this talk, though. Hopefully all of you can go out and talk and say, yeah, we're still in a drought. We need to keep conserving. So when we look at drought and wells, we know that there are more and more wells going in. The data show that. And what I think is a common misconception about groundwater is that it is static or unchanging, kind of like Lady Bird Lake. It's a constant level. And that's not true at all. Groundwater goes up and down with drought, and it goes up and down with pumping. The image on the right-hand side shows like a non-drought water level where you have pumping centers that draw down that water level that can influence neighboring wells. And this is only exacerbated during drought. So during drought, the water level starting point is lower, and then you add pumpage and it really pulls down the water level even more. Whether this is in the Edwards or in the Trinity, similar things happen. A lot of people, when you're looking at groundwater changing, it's very hard to look down a tiny little 4-inch hole, or if it's got a pump in it, a 1/2-inch observation port, and be able to understand what's going on down there. And so I think it's a little bit easier if we kind of think about the changes in water level that we see in the water supply reservoirs, such as Lake Travis. Lake Travis, shown here on the KXAN Oasis cam, you can see the water level is down substantially. And in fact, it's down 43 feet from the full level. Sometimes Island is really getting to be rather vegetated these days because the water levels have been so so low for so long. And that's what we're seeing in the groundwater systems too. It's just not as easy to put a webcam that people check for groundwater systems. I'll show some graphs that are useful, but not nearly as exciting as the OASIS can. When we talk about drought and we talk about the effects of pumping, it's important to understand that groundwater pumping is not slowing down. It is a cumulative effect of the number of wells that are going in. Here, this spaghetti chart is showing the number of wells by county per year. So starting back in 2003, 2004, we have good data on the number of wells that have gone in. There were certainly wells before then, but if we look at the well trends from year to year, there are just more and more wells. For example, in Travis County, we see a spike after the flash drought of 2011, and it's still very popular there. We see consistent wells going in for Comal and for Hayes. And if we look at them in their cumulative effect, we can see that Travis County has over 3,500 wells now that are active and working. And that's drilled since 2003. Comal County is coming up also above 3,000, and Hayes County also with 3,000 wells. So this groundwater pumping is certainly something that we see having a big effect on the groundwater systems. And we can tell by looking at our springs that this groundwater pumping and drought really does impact the groundwater systems. This is Jacobs Well flow, and it's color coded by the management decision that the Hayes Trinity Groundwater Conservation District has made, where there are drought triggers associated to flow, very similar to the way that Barton Springs flow is used by the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District to determine reductions in pumping there. So the darker red is exceptional drought. So that's the 30% reduction from a historic baseline. That's as mean as they can get. We see that there's a correlation between monitoring wells and the flow at Jacobs Well. So this is a good indicator of aquifer storage and groundwater health in the system. You can very easily see the wet periods correspond to rises in the Mount Baldy nearby monitor well there. We have to look at it logarithmically when if we want to look at the low periods, and this just kind of highlights the very, very low flows that we see that we saw in 2009, 2011, the flash drought, 2013, and then again last year. In fact, the number of days of zero flow for Jacobs Well is also very interesting. In 2009, there were 33 days with no flow at all. And last year, there were 35 days with no flow at all. When you look at those days and how it corresponds to the groundwater system, you can say, this is a really good indicator of what's happening. This is a good gut check for the groundwater system in general. And it applies even to the Edwards Aquifer. So many people have heard of the J17 monitor well in San Antonio for the Edwards Aquifer. And looking at those lows of low flow at Jacobs Well, it corresponds similarly, not shockingly, to the lows in the Edwards Aquifer too. So spring flow is a good indicator of groundwater system health. And it's important because the spring flow from the Trinity Springs are contributing to the Edwards Aquifer springs. So even I-35 corridor and communities and Edwards Springs communities should be caring about what's happening in the Trinity Springs systems. If we look at the amount of contribution from Jacob's Well alone, over time, since the well has been, or the gauge has been in place, we can see that there's wet periods and dry periods. And last year was a very, very dry period. Similarly, 2011, 2013, and 2009. So this is how much water is being contributed downstream for the health of fish and in the creeks and rivers, and then also as contribution to the Edwards Aquifer. Looking at what people can do to help. So there's a lot of dots on here, and there's a lot of communities that have ties to groundwater systems. So let's switch and look at this as a way to offer help. You can maintain a well system that really kind of protects your investment, but also protects the aquifer itself. Pump protectors are a type of equipment that makes sure that if your well or if your pump starts pumping too hard, like if it were dry, it would flip a switch and turn off to protect your well from drying out. Pressure tanks make it so that your pump doesn't have to work as hard because it stores water and then doses it out before the pump has to kick on and provide the pressure itself. Storage tanks go one step beyond that and allow the pump to bank water for use to meet the demand of a particular house. They also are a great fail-safe for if you have trouble with your pump, or if your well, the water level in your well drops below the level of the pump, you can have water delivered and stored there. Water softeners take out, they do an ion exchange. This is more, this is less in the protect the groundwater situation. This is more of a trick for homeowners to get high quality water. It takes out the calcium ion and swaps it usually with sodium or potassium, and that allows the water to leave less residue on fixtures and dishes and things like that. It makes your hair, it makes the water softener. Aptly named. UV light systems and chlorinators are ways to treat for bacteria. If the well is in contact with the surface, so if it receives rapid recharge, you can be flushing bacteria into the groundwater system and then pulling it out through your well. And these UV light systems don't change the way the water tastes, but it neutralizes any bacteria. Chlorine, typically used by water systems, does the same thing. It kills the bacteria before it's sent out into the distribution system. When we're talking about well owners, they don't have a water system. They are their own water provider. So they have to understand how their system works and how to protect that investment and then optimize it for water use. And I asked a well professional what his advice was for all the well owners around. He said, absolutely know where your well breaker, where the breaker is that controls the power to your well. If there's a problem with your well, you want to be able to turn it off before it burns up. Also know where your main cutoff valve is, so that if there's a line break in your house, you can turn it off. You can also use it to check for leaks. And it's important to exercise that valve so that it doesn't get a lot of mineral deposits and become kind of frozen in place. It's a good thing to do 1 to 2 times a year. And if you've never had your well system checked, or maybe every few years, have a well servicer come out and check for leaks, and then check the pressure in your tank and the pre-charge in that pressure tank. They can also check the status of components to make sure that you don't have any leaks and that everything's working properly. These pumps are expensive, and they're really expensive to pull through the well column. If there's a problem and it stops working, they have a certain number of starts and stops, and all of the components, the pressure tank and the storage tank, can minimize the number of times that pump has to turn on and off. And the less it has to turn on and off, the longer it will last. In fact, he said that some pumps can last 20 to 30 years if it has a good system and it's not really being abused. And an easy way to abuse your pump and also the aquifer system in general are through leaks. And these are unnecessary water use. They cause wear and tear on your pump and your distribution system for no benefit of the homeowners. And they also, most well owners have septic systems, so they trickle down and cause problems for the septic system and the drain field or the spray field. The EPA did some research and found that 10% of homes have a leak that wastes more than 90 gallons of water a day. That's huge. 1 in 10 homes out there, 1 in 10 of those dots on those maps, or 1 in 10 of the homes in those groundwater dependent and water systems could be wasting water. And so maintaining a leak-free home is a great way to help be part of the solution. Checking for leaks is easy if you are connected to a water system. Our water systems here, particularly Wimberley Water Supply Corporation, sends out leak alerts based on meters, but you can also look at your meter, go out to the meter, don't use any water in your house, and go back and check it an hour later. If any water registers on the meter, then you have a leak. It's more difficult if you have a well system. And what you can do is you can pay attention to your pressure tank. This is method 2 there. That pressure tank is loud when it equalizes and pressurizes. If you're not using water and it cycles on and off, that means that there's a good chance that you have a leak. But you can also use your cutoff valve. And if you turn off the cutoff valve and wait 15 minutes to an hour and then crack the valve, you'll be able to hear water going through that cutoff valve. And if it takes a long time to equalize, it means that while the water was shut off, it leaked out somewhere in your home through a leaky toilet or a leak in a swimming pool system or hose bib, any of those things. So it's important to be a good steward and then also protect your own investment to look for leaks, because we see impacts to our springs, and probably the most notable one is what happened last year at Jacob's Well. They had to suspend swimming because there wasn't enough flow to keep it safe. And since this is a lunchtime lecture, I had to make it fun. I think that Denver Water's Use Only What You Need campaign is absolutely brilliant. And the image on the left there is how much water a running toilet would waste in 3 months. And those are 55-gallon drums stacked on top of each other. They really got creative about how to show people that they're they're wasting too much water on landscape irrigation when they can be doing with much less. So here, the large fire hydrant compared to what your lawn really needs, which is a reasonably sized fire hydrant or no fire hydrant. They're also saying that, grass is dumb, and if you water it a little bit less, that'll be just fine. Broken sprinkler heads are horrible wastes of water. There's another look at how much you should be giving your lawn and what it really needs. And then creative ways of saying, hey, use only what you need, please, in this case, conserve, but they've removed the extraneous. It's like texting. And then this one hits home with the water quality protection lands, because the native plants that are adapted for our area really are the camels of the plant world for us. So using, maintaining a leak-free home, using alternate supplies through either one water or rainwater harvesting is a fantastic way to leverage those resources. Embracing the look and feel of the hill country in our area through native plants, and also helping pass along the conservation message and really making drought and conservation a kitchen table conversation in as many neighborhoods as we can is really important. And then there's a lot of legislative and policy efforts that are going on right now. One example is the Texas Land and Conservation Fund, which would be a fantastic way to allow Texas to invest more in conservation lands, such as the WQPL, but also through conservation easements and parks and preserves, and the pristine streams protections through TCEQ rulemaking, and then also through groundwater studies through the groundwater conservation districts. So with that, I will leave you with a beautiful yet a little disheartening view of Jacob's Well and take any questions that you have for me. So.
Hey, Robin, thank you so much. Really, really good and really informative. Really appreciate all the maps and graphics. It's really great. So I have some questions.
Okay.
First off, when was that picture taken that you just had up on the screen?
This one was taken, I believe, let's bring it back up. This one was taken in, I think it was February.
Okay.
Yep. And so you can see that you could even walk all the way around Jacob's Well here. Jacob's Well is directly influenced by a water supply well. And so occasionally you get a little bit of recovery in the water level, and it will trickle through that gravel bar down at the bottom. You can see a little bit of wetted rock, and that's probably what has happened there. But the water level has dropped below that gravel bar, so it can't flow out anymore.
Okay.
Right now it's below 1 cubic feet per second. The rains have helped a bit.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then our next question, how much of an impact has the recent La Nina period had on water levels?
Yeah. So when we look at the rainfall totals that we got in the Wimberley area, we can see that in 2022, it was a very different year. In fact, I don't believe that we had any rains over 2 inches. Any rainfall or storm total more than 2 inches, which is problematic because we need those larger rain events to generate runoff. And the runoff needs to fill our recharge zone creeks and funnel the water down into cracks and crevices and caves to recharge the aquifer. So the drier La Nina causes big problems because the smaller rain events can't generate runoff or recharge.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That was a really good question.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so this next question is prefaced. A terribly complex question, I know, but can you tell us the current status of legal policy efforts to at least limit pumping out west, which, as I currently understand, is completely unregulated?
All right, depends on how west. It's a relative west. So in Western Hayes County, there is a groundwater conservation district. In fact, there's lots of groundwater conservation districts all throughout Texas. And the rule of capture is kind of the Wild West illusion, I think, that this person is making. Rule of capture makes groundwater a private property right. But back in the 50s, the legislature determined that locally elected and local groundwater conservation districts were the preferred method of groundwater management. So each of those over 100 now groundwater conservation districts has a set of rules that they have as tools to manage groundwater in the different areas. So for example, the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District and the Edwards Aquifer Authority have to contend with endangered species, and the endangered species requirements have allowed or generated a cap on available pumping from the Edwards Aquifer in those areas because of the habitat concerns for the endangered species. Out in the west or to the west in the contributing zone for the Edwards Aquifer or the Trinity aquifer systems, there is not that endangered species habitat issue. And so the groundwater conservation districts don't have that same cap. They can limit through groundwater management zones. In fact, there's one that has been recently established back in 2000 to help protect spring flow at Jacob's Well. But there are still exempt wells that are able to go in, and there are smaller groundwater permits available for that area. So it's something that we need to look at as a society, because we're going to exceed, if we haven't already exceeded the amount of available water, especially considering the droughts, the more severe droughts, the more severe floods, that we're going to have as things change around here.
Great, thank you. And before I go to the next question, I'm going to put some links for resources in the chat for everybody. So we have a link to the Watershed Association's groundwater workshop recap. And then I'm going to share a link to where you can sign up for volunteer work days and guided hikes on the wildlands. And then also a link to our water quality protection lands story map. So I'm going to share those. All right, so you guys can see those in the chat and should be able to click on those. And then for our next question, what percentage of Jacob's Well not flowing as a result of the Trinity Aquifer in Western Hays County being over allocated in terms of permits issued in Hays and Blanco County?
So that is definitely a question. It's a scientific question for sure. We know that groundwater pumping and drought have exacerbated the conditions at Jacob's Well. We know that the Hays Trinity Groundwater Conservation District has declared their most severe drought restrictions, and I think that it's going to come to each individual water system or permittee on how they enacted those, or how they reached those drought reductions, the required drought reductions. And I think that those required drought reductions are in the community's best interest. And when I say communities, I'm talking about the local well owners that use that as their water supply. It's the businesses downstream from the base flow springs, the Middle Trinity base flow springs along all the watersheds. So Onion Creek, Barton Creek, as well as Cypress Creek and the Blanco River, all throughout the hill country, that those pumping reductions are an effective tool to preserving groundwater availability for well owners and also for for spring flow. So I think taking a hard look at drought performance is definitely warranted.
Okay, great. Next question. What was the initial reason to have the 60 people every 2 hours system implemented at Jacob's Well? How were reservations before, and was there a reason that started?
That's a good question for the county, but I can tell you that during COVID, they reduced the number of people. I think it was to 35 people possibly per time block. And I know that yielded a higher quality experience for people, and it allowed people to be a little bit more socially distanced. As far as the 60 people per time block, I think that is it is a comfort level situation on how many people you can get there. It's a very highly sought after reservation, and they very quickly sell out. So I think that, you know, there's a balance between accessibility and making swimming accessible. So that would warrant a larger number of reservations, but I think there's also a space limitation and a safety limitation that the county staff have to consider also in the number of people that can be there safely.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have
And
go ahead.
If you're interested in finding out about the reservations, you can always check the county's Jacobsville Natural Area website. That's where they post it, and that they'll have a note up there that the swimming reservations are not available this year. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. And then I think we have time for one more. I unfortunately sometimes see trash and debris in sections of Slaughter Creek and other areas that are closer to Austin proper. How detrimental is this to runoff and water quality? So I guess in the event of a rainstorm or rain event.
Yeah, so trash and what was the other things that
debris, just the trash.
Okay, trash and debris. Okay. So karst systems like what we have, karst meaning a landscape formed by dissolution, and that's obvious in the caves and springs that we have in the hill country. So karst systems are poor filters. They are not very effective at keeping contaminants out. So you can have large caves in creek beds, and you can have debris and trash get into that cave system and clog it up. And then if those bottles or contaminants have any hazardous materials in them, it can get into the groundwater system. Absolutely. So the water quality protection land and conservation easement system of protection, where you're purchasing land and making sure that it is not developed, is really probably the most effective way of protecting water quality in their in those critical areas. The other way is to use green stormwater controls. And so we've built in a lot of those types of controls into the Wimberley One Water School. And we're seeing more and more of those systems going into development as people are developing tracks. They're controlling the stormwater that runs off. And even homeowners are putting in things like rain gardens and bioswales to help slow down the force of groundwater, the force of stormwater, and even rainwater harvesting systems help in reducing the storm flow from roofs, because when you have that very fast water transport, it can really mobilize a lot of things very quickly. When you disperse the water across a field or across vegetation, then that vegetation with its strong root structures can really help trap sediment, and even in the case of some some contaminants can make sure that it doesn't go down into the groundwater system. I can think of a lot of people that are more eloquent at describing that, but hopefully I addressed the question.
No, that was really good. Really wonderful. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's, we don't want to start a new question and then we run over. So I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. But I just want to say thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. I think folks learned a lot. And I'm going to share this recording on Facebook and YouTube. So that should be out this afternoon or on Monday for everybody.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Robin. I really appreciate it.
Glad you guys were able to join. Thanks for having me.